A Book Summary of A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier. By Audiobook Academy. The 2007 memoir A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier was written by former child soldier Ishmael Beah. An autobiography by a Sierra Leonean soldier during the civil conflict of the early 1990s is included. Critics praised the novel for its accurate portrayal of the horrors of being a child soldier as well as its vivid style. As a Best Debut Author nominee in 2006, it earned a Quill Award nomination. Beah narrates his childhood story in the memoir. When he was a little lad, he was gone from his community when it was invaded by rough insurgents. Beah and his brother elude capture by the rough by moving from village to village and keeping a close eye on their surroundings. Beah is abducted by soldiers from the military and sent to a camp for orphans, where she is segregated from the other boys. Whenever the camp is under attack by rebels, the military forces all of the camp's young boys to participate. At the tender age of 12, Beah joins the ranks of the child soldiers and begins a lifelong regimen of killing training and narcotics use. Many horrible attacks are carried out on rebels and even civilian communities during his tenure in the military, which ends at the age of 15 when UNICEF rescues him and takes him away from the battlefield. Beah realizes that he has been traumatized by the things he has seen and done, and he has to deal with the withdrawal symptoms of the medicines he was compelled to take as a result of this. During his time at the Rehabilitation Clinic, Beah has performed so well that he has been invited to speak before the United Nations in New York City about his time as a child soldier in the Congo War. The book begins with a foreword written by Ishmael in 1998 while he was living in New York City. He's in high school at this point, and he tells the reader that his pals think he's hiding something from them about his past. He claims that this will be the story that everyone will be talking about. Ishmael is a 10-year-old boy when the first chapter begins. 2 years pass before the Civil War comes to a small community, and he recalls how unthinkable it was to him as a youngster to think about conflict. Even the more senior residents of the community have difficulty grasping the plight of the refugees passing through town. They can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to live in a place like this. In the past 2 years, Ishmael and his brother Junior, along with Taloy and Muhammad, have created a rap group. They were introduced to rap music during a family vacation to the United States, where their fathers work for American corporations. That the music was being made by black men struck a chord with Ishmael. Hip-hop culture's language and fashion influences his appearance and demeanor. During the first months of 1993, the guys travel to Matarajong to take part in a talent show there. At a friend's house the next day early he comes from school and informed them that the rebels had invaded Ishmael Mogbuimo's village of Mogbuimo. They're told by a buddy that his town will undoubtedly be the next target. Despite the influx of Mogbuimo refugees, no one is able to confirm the safety of Ishmael and his family. When Ishmael and his companions decide to return to their hamlet in search of their relatives, they discover that it has been nearly completely destroyed, with bodies littering the streets. After returning to Matarajong without locating their families, Ishmael and his buddies began to spend their days waiting for word from them. As Ishmael is having another recurring nightmare about his time in Sierra Leone in 1998, we are whisked back to that year. He invaded a community with an AK-47, stealing its food and ammunition. Afterward, the troops gave each other high fives and feasted on the food that the locals had provided and then opened fire on them. Many of the townspeople were young men his own age. Ishmael attempts to relax himself and wishes for the return of daylight so that he can get back to his new life in New York City once again. It took weeks for Ishmael and his pal to learn what had happened to their families after the onslaught on their hometown was on. A man from nearby Sambuya arrived and informed them that it was the location of the most recent incident. The letters of the Revolutionary United Front have been carved into the man's torso with a hot bayonet by the rebels. Matarajong will be the next stop for the rebels, who claim to be fighting for the people, and they expect a warm reception. Ishmael and his comrades evacuate the village as soon as the rebels attack. For days, the lads travel silently past communities that have been ransacked and streets that have been littered with bodies. They eventually reach to the point of having to return to Matarajong for food because they are so ravenous. Ishmael had to leave behind some money, which they find buried beneath a bed, even though their friend's house had been demolished. Ishmael and his companions must cross a field littered with the remains of the dead in order to reach the rebel-controlled settlement. Something falls from the boy's pocket during the anxious crossing, alerting the guards in the nearby tower. Despite having made it to the other side, Ishmael has to watch as his friends and brother pretend to be dead so that the guards don't see them. Despite the fact that the lads now have money, they are aware that the entire adjacent hamlet is stockpiling food in anticipation of the rebel attacks and will not sell to them any of that food they do not want. It's decided that they'll steal some maize from a young child they see eating it. Desperation drove Ishmael to do the crime, and he was oblivious to the consequences. The guys eventually return to Matrujong, despite the danger, because they don't know what else to do. Captured by insurgents, they are compelled to join a big crowd of locals. Ishmael is astonished to see rebels torturing and taunting an elderly man, as no one in the town had ever considered disrespecting an elder in such a way before the raid. During their initiation, the rebels inform Ishmael and his brother it will be a struggle to the death. Fire breaks out nearby, though, and this gives the youngsters an opportunity to flee before the battle begins. One village over, Ishmael and his companions proceed silently. The villagers in the area are afraid of Ishmael and his buddies because they believe they are a band of teenage rebels. A village's volunteer guards quickly apprehend them and bring them before the council. The council discovers a cassette tape with rap music on it in Ishmael's pocket, which only serves to further their mistrust of the group. However, a young Matrujong refugee tells the village council that he recognizes Ishmael and his companions from the talent performance and wants to thank them for their help. However, they decide to leave since they believe they would be pursued by rebels if they stay in the area. One of the boys' aunts lives in the adjacent village of Cometer, so they set off to visit her. Before the rebels arrive and burn the town, they arrive and spend 3 months in the village helping with the planting season. Both Ishmael and Junior are killed in the attack. When asked if he ever saw Junior again, Ishmael says no. For 2 weeks, Ishmael hides away with a nice family before setting off on his own. It is 5 days before he sees any other living people or any intact settlements as he goes toward the sea. An unidentified tree's fruit enthralls Ishmael, who has no idea whether it's poisonous or not. Recalling the wisdom of his grandfather, Ishmael wishes he'd heeded his advice and learned how to survive in the wilderness. He is overcome by loneliness, yet he finds solace in the noises of the animals that surround him. He begins to dread going to sleep and waking up in the morning. Ishmael had been living in the forest for a month when he is driven out by a pack of ferocious hogs. A gang of boys, some of whom he recognizes as classmates, happens to cross his path by pure happenstance. A month on his own has made him wary of new social situations and makes him fearful that the big number of boys in the group will cause trouble. But he's so desperate for companionship that he's willing to take the chance and stay with them. For a few days, the guys travel together and frighten the villages they come across. The townspeople repeatedly attack them, but once they realize they are refugees, they become more tolerant. If the conflict has not yet reached the coast, Ishmael's troop should be able to find a place to call home once they get at the ocean. Villages, on the other hand, appear to be forlornly deserted. Before being brought before the chief at one town, the group is ambushed and tied up. Villagers chase the intruders out of town with their shoes, rather than harming them. In the sand, Ishmael and his companions must endure temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit without shoes. A guy in a discovered cabin feeds and cares to the boys' damaged feet after they pass out from exhaustion at the conclusion of the first day on the trail. So when they ask him for his name, he simply says it's best not to reveal it to them. Villagers tie the youngsters up again and bring them to the village leader. When the chief hears his cassette of rap music, he orders Ishmael to play the music. When he sees that they are merely lads, he lets them go. As they continue their journey, each of the guys tells the narrative of how he ended up with Ishmael in the first place. They all came from villages that were attacked by rebels, and they all have harrowing tales to tell about the killing and torture they threw as a result of that experience. Ishmael comes to understand why they walk silently after hearing the stories. During the day, the gang forages for food and moves about at night. So that someone is constantly on guard, they begin sleeping in shifts. They see a dead crow on the ground as they go and believe it to be a terrible omen. But they're so ravenous that they'll eat anything. Ishmael reminisces about his name-giving ceremony as the group walks. A sick youngster named Sidhu is brought to the group's attention, and they decide to seek medical help in a nearby village. Astonished by how normal things appear to be in the village, they travel there. The villagers take care of them, feeding and housing them. When a woman comes across the group, she informs them all of the whereabouts of her family. Ishmael learns from her that Junior has lately visited that village. As a result, He is eager to continue his journey and catch up to his brother. The lads honor Saidu's death by burying his body themselves after he passes away unexpectedly. The next day, they are re-energized and ready to continue their search for their families. Many members of Ishmael's family are said to be residing in the same village as his group. However, the hamlet is under siege when they arrive. They meet Ishmael's friend Gasimu, a banana grower, outside the hamlet, and hide until the gunfire dies down. Ishmael rushes inside the village to see it destroyed when it goes silent. No remains were found when Gasimu showed Ishmael the hut where his family had been staying. The guys retreat into the woods as more rebels approach and the situation becomes more dangerous. Everyone realizes that Gasimu has been killed as soon as they've stopped running. He passes away shortly after. Soldiers finally apprehend the youngsters and transport them to La, a military-occupied settlement. Orphans abound in this sleepy hamlet. When they're not washing dishes or cutting veggies, they're doing other menial jobs around town. Even though Ishmael is relieved to be safe, the migraines and dreams that follow are debilitating. A few weeks later, rebels encircle the village and the military inform the men and boys that they must join them or leave the village. Ishmael and his pals know that if they leave their town, they will be executed by the rebels, so they decide to enlist. On that particular day, more than 30 young men between the ages of 7 and 16 signed up. Upon their arrival, they are handed weapons, fresh clothing, and footwear by the soldiers stationed at the barracks. The rap cassette tape of Ishmael is stolen and destroyed. Angry and afraid, Ishmael's pals are unable to provide him any support. Boys will begin training shortly. They use banana trees as dummies when firing AK-47s. They come to the conclusion that the only way to avenge their family's deaths is to kill the rebels themselves. After receiving a white tablet that is supposed to increase their stamina, the young men enter the forest for the first time. There are 2 deaths in this fight, one of which was Ishmael's first murder. Ishmael helps a corporal remove the deceased rebels' belongings, and Ishmael finds that he has no feelings for them. As the effects of Ishmael's medication wear off, he experiences a nightmare. He's afraid when he first wakes up in the tent and immediately starts shooting his gun. Lieutenant and corporal rush in to give him more tablets. It is not long before Ishmael develops a dependency on the drugs, and he also begins to use marijuana and a cocaine gunpowder cocktail. He has trouble sleeping because of this mix, and he spends most nights binge-watching violent films. Army invade the rebel camps when they run short of food, compelling even more young men from their communities to join them. Because of this, the lieutenant excuses this by arguing that they're fighting for people, whereas rebels are fighting for violence's sake. Ishmael and the other men applaud him when he acts brutally. The corporal decides to hold a competition with a couple of the rebel inmates one day. He has a throat-slitting competition with a handful of the young troops, one of whom is Ishmael. Ishmael is victorious thanks to a bayonet kill with a slit throat. As a result, he is promoted to the rank of lieutenant. In the course of his time with the soldiers, Ishmael develops a close relationship with them. UNICEF men arrive in January 1996, just after Ishmael turns 15, to remove the young soldiers. Lined up, men select the youngest boys to be relieved of duties. They are promised that they will be enrolled in school and begin a new chapter of their life. The lieutenant congratulates the boys on their service to the country and the people of the country, but he doesn't go into any further detail. At a complex in the capital of Sierra Leone they are given food as well as mattresses. They are taken aback by the shift and are unsure of what to do. When a group of rough fighters is brought in, the lads get into a brawl with other boy soldiers. 6 individuals have already been shot by the time the MPs arrive to break up the fight. While at Benin home, Ishmael, along with the other boys, is suffering from the effects of drug withdrawal. At the recovery center, the boys are first misbehaving. Armed conflict and drug-related looting are all too common, as are medical supply raids. Although the lads initially resist, the staff eventually wins them over and they begin to settle down. At this stage, the full extent of their trauma is beginning to emerge. It occurs to Ishmael that he has little to no recollection of his prior life as a child before becoming a soldier. All broken items are replaced with no fuss after the boys' violent outbursts are reminded that it is not their fault. Attending a few hours of school each day, the lads find themselves disappointed by their lack of progress. When Ishmael and another soldier went into war, they wiped out an entire town. His success earned him the nickname Green Snake because of his mastery in hiding in the undergrowth and his ability to evade detection. When Esther, Ishmael's nurse, gets him some rap tapes and a Walkman, he begins to open up to her about his past. When UNICEF and the UN arrive to inspect the center, the boys decide to put on a talent show for their visitors. Ishmael does a rap and a Shakespeare monologue. As a result of his excellent work, the medical staff asks him to serve as the center's spokesperson. If given patience and time, Ishmael believes that children can be recovered from the trauma of war. Tommy, an uncle Ishmael has never met, is discovered by his care worker. Tommy, Ishmael's uncle, stops by the facility and vows to adopt him. Ishmael is swayed by Ishmael's genuineness and empathy. After saying farewell to his pals at the center, Tommy takes Ishmael to his family and proceeds to tell him more about his father, who died in a car accident. A tranquil, joyful life is difficult for Ishmael, and he frequently withdraws. It isn't long until the girl Ishmael meets in the new community begins to pressure him to talk about his history. It appears that Ishmael is happy to be alone, and he terminates relationships in the same way in the future. During a visit from his caseworker, Ishmael is informed that a group of youngsters from the home will travel to New York City to convey their story before the United Nations. To get into the organization, she wants Ishmael to apply. Applying for the visa and passport, Ishmael is soon able to travel to the U.S. Once in New York, Ishmael discovers that the city is both cold and interesting. When he arrives in the city, he is taken aback by how different it is from the music he has heard. He finds that he is not the only young guy whose youth was taken away by the war when he meets other survivors at the UN. Laura Sims, one of the event's organizers, develops a close relationship with Ishmael as she encourages the youngsters to share their experiences. Ishmael is soon sent back to Uncle Tommy's and begins the school year soon after that. The other pupils at the school are afraid of him because of his military experience, and they refuse to sit next to him or talk to him. He believes that the Civil War is coming and doubts that he will make it through again when gunfire breaks out in the capital in May of 1997. The administration was overturned by the RUF and the military by that night, and they took control of the city. His concern is that he has escaped the war, only to find that the war has returned to claim him. Uncle Tommy becomes ill quickly and succumbs to his illness due to the lack of hospitals in the city due to rebel control. Aware of the impending danger, Ishmael decides to leave the city. He asks Laura Sims if he can move to New York and live with her. Ishmael departs the country and heads to the Sierra Leone embassy in Guinea, where he is met by the country's ambassador. As a war refugee, he is housed there and granted a ticket to New York City. Ishmael Beah, the book's author and protagonist. He served in the Sierra Leone Armed Forces for numerous years as a juvenile soldier. Ishmael's story is a tale of personal transformation and resiliency. His adolescence in his hometown prior to the war is full of love and laughter. In the midst of combat, he transforms into a slaughtering machine capable of displaying awful acts of violence. The troop's nickname for Ishmael was Green Snake, and he took great satisfaction in it. Ishmael now recognizes that his actions in the forest during the conflict had brought him dangerously close to evil, a parallel to the biblical account of Adam and Eve. Child soldiers rescued by UNICEF are initially reluctant but soon begin to open up about their experiences and begin to heal. Ishmael is one of them. Ishmael learns to deal with his animosity and to excuse himself for the battle that wasn't his problem via the love and understanding of his medical caretaker and distant family. With the help of other people and his own narrative, he is able to educate the world about the heinousness of the effects that war has on young people. Esther is Ishmael's nurse in Benin House, where he is taken after the battle. Using rap music on a cassette tape and a Walkman, she not only treats the boy's physical wounds but also gradually encourages him to talk about his mental trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Ishmael's return to innocence is a direct result of this recollection of his upbringing before the conflict. Ishmael returns to his pre-war self thanks to Esther's tolerance and affection. Even though he has changed, he comes to trust Esther and ask for aid. Uncle Tommy, Ishmael's father's brother, who adopts the boy and raises him as his own. Freetown is Sierra Leone's capital, and Tommy works as a carpenter in the city's warehouses. In addition to raising his own children, he also takes care of the kids of relatives who are unable to care for them. Ishmael's Uncle Tommy arrives at the rehab center as soon as he learns of the boy's situation and quickly forms a bond with him. For the next few weeks, he will continue to come, telling Ishmael stories about his father and accompanying him for walks. Although Ishmael has never met him before, he eventually warms up to the man and agrees to live with him. Unlike some of the other boys who are discharged from the facility, Ishmael's uncle Tommy treats him like a son and so prevents him from becoming another soldier. The lieutenant, the man in charge of the branch of the Sierra Leone Armed Services that Ishmael was a part of as a child. The lieutenant serves as a father figure to the younger guys, who aren't old enough to comprehend how harmful he is. Before UNICEF can remove some of the children, he must first train them to fight the insurgents. Ishmael is upset and betrayed to be turned over to the UNICEF guys without explanation because the lieutenant and Ishmael shared a love of Shakespeare and Ishmael looked up to the man. Laura Sims is one of the organizers of Ishmael's child army trip to the United Nations. The two of them become close and she invites the youngsters over to her house following the meeting. As an outsider, Laura is concerned about the plight of children in war-torn nations, and Ishmael is awed and delighted by this. Laura supports the children's stories and encourages them to tell their tales to the world. Laura and Ishmael remain in touch when Ishmael returns home and write to each other frequently. Laura is the first person Ishmael contacts after realizing he must leave the nation. Laura becomes Ishmael's foster mother soon after he arrives in the United States and is able to speak English fluently. Laura, like Esther and Tommy, shows Ishmael sympathy and affection as he deals with his wartime memories. Born in Mogbuimo, Bonth District, in Sierra Leone's November 1980, Ishmael Beah is a musician from Freetown. His boyhood was full of joy and innocence until one day rebels stormed the town and completely destroyed it, forcing Beah to abandon the community. Beah wandered the streets of Sierra Leone for months with a gang of his age before being apprehended by the military and taken to a refugee camp. Beah was compelled to join the military as a juvenile soldier when the camp was overrun by rebels. A combination of narcotics and fear had indoctrinated Beah, who fought the rebels for 3 years before being rescued by UNICEF and taken to a treatment facility. Beah began to speak up about his experience in the military and the things he did while a soldier with the support of the recovery center staff and an uncle who eventually adopted him. As part of the UN delegation for child soldiers in 1996, Beah was present. Laura Sims, a foster mother he met in New York a year earlier, took in Beah after he fled the capital of Sierra Leone following the death of his uncle, who had been killed by the rebels. At the end of her time in college, Beah earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Oberlin College, which she attended after graduating from the United Nations International School. With the publication of his biography, A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, in 2007, Beah's wartime experiences were widely publicized. Beah, who was 29 at the time, returned to Sierra Leone for an ABC News program in 2009 and characterized the experience as bittersweet. Beah is now working on his second book, a work of fiction about a town trying to go back to normal after a period of civil conflict. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.